The rain had just stopped when David pulled up to the valet stand outside Bella Vista, one of the most expensive restaurants in the city. He looked at himself in the rearview mirror one more time, adjusting his tie nervously. Tonight was special. His daughter Lisa had just gotten accepted into law school, and he wanted to celebrate properly. David had worked his whole life to get where he was today. Starting from nothing, he built his software company from his garage 15 years ago. Now it employed over 300 people and was worth millions. But success hadn't changed him much. He still drove the same car he bought 5 years ago, still lived in the same neighborhood where he raised his kids, and still remembered what it felt like to count every penny. "You ready, sweetheart?" he asked Lisa as she checked her makeup in the passenger seat. "I still can't believe you made reservations here," she said, looking up at the fancy building with its gold trim and crystal windows. "This place costs more for one meal than I spend on groceries in a month." David laughed. "Well, you don't get accepted to Harvard Law every day. Besides, your old man can afford it now." They walked through the heavy glass doors and David immediately felt the difference in atmosphere. Everything screamed luxury, from the marble floors that reflected the chandelier lights above, to the soft classical music playing in the background. Well-dressed people sat at perfectly set tables, speaking in hushed tones while servers in crisp uniforms moved silently between them. The hostess at the front desk looked up as they approached. She was young, maybe 25, with perfectly styled blonde hair and makeup that probably took an hour to apply. Her smile was bright and professional as she greeted the couple ahead of them. But when she looked at David and Lisa, something changed. Her smile became smaller, more forced. "Good evening," she said, but her voice lacked the warmth she had shown the previous guests. "Do you have a reservation?" "Yes," David replied politely. "Thompson, party of 2. I called 3 weeks ago and specifically requested a table by the window." The hostess typed something into her computer, her perfectly manicured nails clicking against the keyboard. She frowned slightly, then looked up with that same strained smile. "Oh yes, I see it here. Unfortunately, those tables are all taken tonight. But we do have a lovely table available." David glanced around the restaurant. He could clearly see several empty tables by the large windows that overlooked the city, but he didn't want to make a scene, especially not on Lisa's special night. "That's fine," he said. "Whatever you have available." The hostess grabbed 2 menus and led them through the restaurant. David noticed how other diners looked up as they passed. Some glances were curious, others seemed judgmental. He had experienced this before, being one of the few black faces in spaces like this. It used to bother him more when he was younger, but he had learned to rise above it. They were seated at a small table near the back of the restaurant, close to the kitchen doors. Every time the doors swung open, the sounds of clattering dishes and shouting chefs broke through the otherwise peaceful atmosphere. David looked around and noticed that all the tables near the windows, the ones he had specifically requested, were indeed empty. "Dad, this is ridiculous," Lisa whispered, leaning across the table. "You made that reservation weeks ago and you asked for a window table. This is discrimination." "Let's not jump to conclusions," David said quietly, though he was thinking the same thing. "Maybe they're reserved for later guests." Lisa shook her head. "You know what this is. You work twice as hard as anyone else and still get treated like this. It's not fair." David reached across and patted his daughter's hand. "Life isn't always fair, honey. But we don't let other people's ignorance ruin our good times. Tonight is about celebrating your achievement." As they sat there, David watched the hostess seat 3 more parties, all white couples, at the very window tables he had requested. Each time she was all smiles and warm welcomes. Each time she made sure they were comfortable and happy with their seating. The irony wasn't lost on him. Just that morning, he had been in a boardroom finalizing a deal worth $50 million. He employed hundreds of people, contributed millions in taxes, and had donated more money to local charities than most people would see in a lifetime. Yet here he sat being treated like he didn't belong. "You know what really gets me?" David said, keeping his voice low. "It's not about the money or the status. It's about basic human respect." That hostess didn't see a successful businessman taking his daughter out to celebrate. She saw what she expected to see. Lisa nodded, her law student mind already analyzing the situation. It's unconscious bias at best, outright discrimination at worst. Either way, it's wrong. A server approached their table, a young man who looked to be in his early 20s. He had perfectly styled hair and moved with the kind of confidence that comes from privilege. His uniform was spotless, and he carried himself like someone who had never been told no in his life. "Good evening," he said, but his tone was different from what David had heard him use with other tables. There was an edge to it, a subtle lack of respect that was hard to pinpoint but impossible to miss. The young man placed the menus down with less care than necessary, not bothering to make eye contact with either David or Lisa. He stood there for a moment, looking around the restaurant as if he had better places to be. "Can I start you with some water?" he asked, but it sounded more like he was doing them a favor than providing service they were paying for. "That would be great," David replied, maintaining his composure despite the obvious rudeness. "And could we also see your wine list?" The server's eyebrows rose slightly as if the request surprised him. "The wine list? Sure, I can get that for you." The way he said it made it clear he thought they were in over their heads, like they were putting on airs they couldn't afford. David had heard that tone before, and it always stung, no matter how successful he became. As the server walked away, David noticed how his demeanor completely changed when he approached the table next to them. His voice became warmer, more attentive. He smiled genuinely and took time to explain menu items and make recommendations. The difference was stark and impossible to ignore. "I can't believe this," Lisa said, her voice tight with anger. "The way he's treating us is completely unacceptable. We should leave." "We're not going anywhere," David said firmly but not unkindly. "We have every right to be here and we're going to enjoy our dinner. Don't let their ignorance steal your joy." But even as he said the words, David felt the familiar weight of frustration settling on his shoulders. He had hoped that by now in 2024, these experiences would be behind him. He had hoped that his success would shield his children from this kind of treatment. Yet here they were, being made to feel unwelcome in a place where their money was just as green as everyone else's. The server returned with 2 glasses of water, setting them down with just a little too much force. Water sloshed slightly over the rim of Lisa's glass, leaving a small puddle on the white tablecloth. He didn't apologize or offer to clean it up. "Here's your wine list," he said, practically dropping the leather-bound menu on the table between them. His name tag read Kevin, and he stood there with his arms crossed, tapping his foot impatiently. David picked up the wine list and began reading through it. The prices were steep as expected, but that wasn't a problem for him. He had celebrated many business deals with expensive bottles, and he knew quality when he saw it. "The Caymus Cabernet looks good," David said to Lisa, pointing to a bottle that cost $250. "Remember when we visited Napa Valley last year? You said you wanted to try this one." Lisa smiled at the memory. "That sounds perfect, Dad." David looked up at Kevin. "We'd like a bottle of the Caymus Cabernet Sauvignon, please." Kevin's expression shifted to something between surprise and suspicion. He glanced at the wine list, then back at David, as if making sure he had heard correctly. "The Caymus?" Kevin repeated, his voice carrying a tone that suggested David didn't know what he was ordering. "That's a $250 bottle." The comment hung in the air like a slap. David felt his jaw tighten, but he kept his voice level. "Yes, I'm aware of the price. That's what we'd like." "Are you sure?" Kevin pressed, his voice getting louder. "Maybe you'd prefer something from our house selection? We have a nice red blend for $35. Other diners at nearby tables were starting to turn and look. David could feel their stares, and he saw Lisa's face reddening with embarrassment and anger. "I said we liked the Caymus," David repeated, his voice still calm but with an edge of steel. "Please." Kevin shrugged in a way that clearly said he thought they were making a mistake. "Okay, but just so you know, we require payment up front for bottles over $100 from certain customers." The words hit like a physical blow. David had never been asked to pay up front for anything at a restaurant in his life. He was a man who regularly made business deals worth millions, who had never bounced a check or defaulted on a payment. Yet here was this young server, barely out of college, questioning his ability to pay for a bottle of wine. "Excuse me?" David said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Store policy," Kevin said with a shrug that wasn't apologetic at all. "For expensive items, we sometimes require advance payment to avoid any complications." Lisa stood up so quickly her chair almost fell over. "This is absolutely ridiculous. We're leaving." "Sit down, honey," David said gently, but his eyes never left Kevin's face. "We're not going anywhere." He reached into his jacket and pulled out his wallet, removing a black American Express card. the kind that has no spending limit and requires a 7-figure income to qualify for. He placed it deliberately on the table where Kevin could see it. "Will this work as advance payment?" David asked, his voice dripping with controlled anger. Kevin glanced at the card, but instead of looking embarrassed, he seemed to become even more hostile. "Anyone can have a fake card these days," he said loudly enough for half the restaurant to hear. "We prefer cash for advance payment." The entire dining room seemed to go quiet. David could feel dozens of eyes on them now, watching this public humiliation unfold. Some diners looked uncomfortable with the scene, while others seemed to be enjoying the show. "Kevin," David said, standing up slowly. At 6'2", he towered over the young server. "I think you need to get your manager. Right now." "My manager is busy with paying customers," Kevin shot back, his voice full of contempt. "Maybe you folks would be more comfortable at the McDonald's down the street. I hear they're having a special on Happy Meals." The comment was met with a few gasps from nearby tables. Even in a room full of people who might harbor their own prejudices, Kevin's behavior was crossing a line that made everyone uncomfortable. Lisa was shaking with rage. "How dare you speak to my father like that? Do you have any idea who you're talking to?" Kevin rolled his eyes dramatically. "Let me guess, he's some kind of rapper or athlete, right?" "That's what they all claim." The ignorance and assumptions in that statement were breathtaking. David felt something inside him snap, but instead of exploding, he became even calmer. It was a skill he had learned in business. The angrier he got, the more controlled he became. "Actually," David said in a voice that could have cut glass, "I'm the CEO of TechFlow Industries. Perhaps you've heard of us? We're the company that just announced a $50 million investment in local businesses, including restaurants." For the first time, Kevin looked uncertain. He glanced around nervously, as if suddenly realizing that other people were watching and listening to every word. "Right," Kevin said, but with less conviction. "And I'm the King of England." An elderly woman at a nearby table leaned over to her husband and whispered loudly, "Harold, isn't TechFlow the company that was just on the news? The one that donated all that money to the children's hospital?" Her husband nodded, looking uncomfortable. "I think you're right, Margaret. This is terrible." Kevin heard the whispers and saw more people pulling out their phones. In today's world, he was one video away from becoming a viral sensation for all the wrong reasons. "Look," he said, his voice losing some of its earlier bravado. "I'm just doing my job here. We have policies." "Your policies don't include treating customers with basic human dignity," David interrupted. "Your policies don't include common courtesy and respect." A well-dressed man at another table called out, "Young man, your behavior is absolutely disgraceful. I've been coming to this restaurant for 10 years and I've never seen anything like this." Kevin's face was getting red now, but instead of backing down, he seemed to double down on his rudeness. "I don't know what kind of game you people are trying to play here, but this is a respectable establishment. We cater to a certain type of clientele." The phrase "you people" hung in the air like poison. Even diners who might have been sympathetic to Kevin's suspicions were now looking at him with disgust. He had crossed every line of professional behavior and basic human decency. "That's enough," came a firm voice from behind Kevin. Everyone turned to see an older woman in a manager's uniform striding quickly toward their table. Her face was a mixture of horror and determination as she took in the scene. David and Lisa standing at their table, Kevin red-faced and defensive, and a dining room full of people staring in uncomfortable silence. The manager's name tag identified her as Patricia, and she looked like someone who had been in the restaurant business for decades. She moved with the kind of authority that comes from years of handling difficult situations. "Kevin, step away from this table immediately," she ordered, her voice carrying the kind of authority that brooked no argument. "But Patricia, I said step away now." Kevin reluctantly moved back, but he continued to glare at David and Lisa, as if they were the ones causing the problem. His attitude suggested he still believed he was in the right, that he was somehow protecting the restaurant from undesirable customers. Patricia turned to David and Lisa with an expression of genuine mortification. "Sir, madam, I am so incredibly sorry for what you've just experienced. This behavior is completely unacceptable and does not represent our establishment in any way." David nodded slowly, his anger still simmering just beneath the surface. "I hope not," he said. "Because if this is how you treat all your customers, you won't be in business much longer." Patricia's face grew even more serious as she fully grasped the situation. She had been watching from across the restaurant, but she hadn't heard everything until she got closer. Now, seeing the faces of other diners and the obvious tension in the air, she knew this was bad. Really bad. "Kevin, go to my office right now," she said without taking her eyes off David and Lisa. "We'll discuss this later." "But I didn't do anything wrong," Kevin protested, his voice taking on a whining quality. "I was just following protocol. We have to be careful about, go to my office now." Patricia's voice left no room for argument. Kevin shuffled away, mumbling under his breath about how unfair everything was. As he passed other tables, several diners shook their heads in disgust. One elderly gentleman actually turned his chair away from Kevin, as if he couldn't stand to look at him. Patricia took a deep breath and turned back to David and Lisa. She had been in the restaurant business for 25 years, and she had seen her share of difficult situations. But this was different. This wasn't just bad service or a miscommunication. This was discrimination, plain and simple, happening in her restaurant on her watch. "Please," she said, gesturing toward their chairs. "Would you sit down so we can make this right?" David looked at Lisa, who was still visibly upset. Her law school training was already kicking in, and he could see her mental wheels turning as she processed what they had just experienced. "I'm not sure there's a way to make this right," Lisa said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "What your employee just did was not only morally wrong, it was potentially illegal. Discrimination based on race is against federal law." Patricia nodded gravely. "You're absolutely right, and I want you to know that his behavior does not reflect our values or our training. We have strict policies against discrimination of any kind." "Well, your policies aren't working," David said, finally sitting back down. "Because what just happened wasn't subtle. It wasn't unconscious bias. It was deliberate. Public humiliation." As they talked, other diners were clearly listening in. The restaurant had gone from its usual quiet, refined atmosphere to something more like a courtroom, with everyone waiting to see how this drama would unfold. Patricia pulled up a chair from a nearby empty table. "May I sit with you for a moment? I want to understand exactly what happened so I can address it properly." David nodded, though his body language remained guarded. "We made a reservation 3 weeks ago. I specifically requested a window table. When we arrived, your hostess said those tables were taken, then seated us here. Since then, I've watched her seat 3 other couples at the exact tables I requested." "That's completely unacceptable," Patricia said, making notes on a small pad. "What else?" Lisa spoke up. "When we ordered wine, your server questioned whether we could afford it. He demanded payment up front, claiming it was policy for certain customers. Then he suggested we might be more comfortable at McDonald's." Patricia's pen stopped moving. She looked up with genuine shock. "He said what?" "He also made assumptions about my father's profession," Lisa continued. "And when Dad told him he was a CEO, Kevin basically called him a liar." Around them, other diners were nodding and murmuring agreement. The elderly woman who had recognized David's company name leaned over again. "I heard the whole thing, dear," she said to Patricia. "That young man was absolutely horrible. Rude doesn't begin to cover it." Patricia looked around the dining room and realized that this situation had an audience. In the age of social media, bad service could go viral within hours. But more than that, she was genuinely horrified by what she was hearing. "Sir," she said to David, "I need to ask you something. And please know that this question comes from a place of wanting to make things right, not from doubt. You mentioned you're a CEO. May I ask what company?" David reached into his wallet and pulled out a business card, sliding it across the table. Patricia picked it up and read it, her eyes growing wide. "TechFlow Industries," she whispered. "Oh my God." She looked up at David with a new expression, one of recognition and dawning horror. TechFlow Industries wasn't just any tech company. It was one of the most successful businesses in the city, known not only for its innovative software but for its charitable contributions and community involvement. "You're David Thompson," Patricia said. And it wasn't a question. "Yes, I am." Patricia's face went pale. She knew that name, not just from business news but from the restaurant industry itself. TechFlow Industries had just announced a major initiative to support local businesses, including a partnership program with restaurants that provided both funding and technology support. "I am so sorry," Patricia said, But her apology carried a different weight now. Before, she had been apologizing for bad service. Now she was apologizing for something that could have serious business consequences. But David held up his hand. Don't apologize to me because of who I am or what my company does. Apologize because what happened here was wrong, regardless of my identity. The person at the next table deserves the same respect I do. His words carried the weight of someone who had clearly thought about these issues before, someone who had experienced discrimination despite his success. Lisa leaned forward. My father is right. This isn't about his company or his money. It's about basic human dignity. What if we had been a young couple on their first date here? What if we had been a family celebrating a birthday? Would that treatment have been acceptable then? Patricia shook her head. No, it wouldn't have been. And you're both right. I'm apologizing because what happened was fundamentally wrong, not because of who you are. An uncomfortable silence fell over their table, broken only by the soft clinking of silverware and glasses from other diners who were trying to pretend they weren't listening to every word. What happens now? David asked. Because I'll be honest with you, Patricia. This isn't the first time something like this has happened to me, and it probably won't be the last. But it's the first time my daughter has had to experience it, and that makes me angrier than anything else. Patricia looked at Lisa, who was clearly still shaken by what she had witnessed. How old are you, if you don't mind me asking? 22, Lisa replied. I just got accepted to Harvard Law School. Congratulations, Patricia said genuinely. That's an incredible achievement. She paused, then continued. I have a daughter about your age. If someone treated her the way Kevin treated you tonight, I would be furious. Not just disappointed or upset. Furious. She turned back to David. I want you to know that Kevin will be terminated immediately. This isn't a suspension or a warning. What he did tonight was firing offense, period. What about the hostess? Lisa asked. She's the one who seated us back here when the window tables were clearly available. Patricia nodded. I'll be reviewing the seating situation with her as well. If she deliberately seated you poorly based on assumptions about who you were, that's also unacceptable. David appreciated Patricia's directness, but he could see something else in her expression. There was fear there, and he suspected it wasn't just about losing customers or getting bad reviews. Is there something else? He asked. Patricia hesitated, then spoke carefully. TechFlow Industries was just announced as a partner in our restaurant group's expansion project. The news was supposed to be released next week. Your company's investment is helping us open 3 new locations. The irony was staggering. Kevin had just insulted and humiliated the CEO of the very company that was investing millions of dollars in their business. David almost had to admire the cosmic justice of the situation. I see, David said quietly. I want you to know that I'm not trying to fix this because of the business relationship, Patricia said quickly. I'm trying to fix it because it's the right thing to do. But I also want you to know that this doesn't represent who we are as a company. David studied her face for a long moment. He had gotten good at reading people in his years as a CEO, and he believed Patricia was sincere. But sincerity didn't undo the damage that had been done. Patricia excused herself for a moment, saying she needed to handle the Kevin situation immediately. As she walked toward the back of the restaurant, David and Lisa sat in the strange quiet that had settled over their section of the dining room. Dad? Lisa said softly. Are you okay? David was quiet for a moment, looking out at the city lights through the windows where they should have been sitting. You know, I thought I had gotten used to this kind of thing. I thought it didn't bother me anymore. But it does bother you. It does, especially when you have to see it, when you have to experience it. He turned to look at his daughter, this brilliant young woman who was about to start law school, who was going to spend her career fighting for justice. I'm sorry you had to go through that. Don't apologize, Dad, you didn't do anything wrong. That server, Kevin, he's the one who should be apologizing. From across the restaurant, they could see Patricia talking animatedly with the hostess near the front entrance. The hostess kept shaking her head and gesturing, clearly defending herself. Then Patricia pointed toward their table, and the hostess's face changed. She looked over at David and Lisa with what appeared to be recognition dawning in her eyes. Meanwhile, other diners were starting to approach their table. The elderly couple from nearby stood up first. Excuse me, the woman said politely. I hope you don't mind us interrupting, but we wanted to say how sorry we are for what just happened. That young man's behavior was absolutely disgusting. Her husband nodded vigorously. In all my years, I've never seen anything like it. We've been customers here for a decade, and if that's how they treat people, we won't be coming back. David was touched by their support. Thank you. That means a lot. Are you really the CEO of TechFlow? The woman asked. We read about your company in the newspaper. The work you're doing with the Children's Hospital is wonderful. I am, and thank you. But honestly, what happened tonight would have been just as wrong if I worked at the grocery store or taught school or did anything else. Everyone deserves to be treated with respect. More people began approaching. A young couple stopped by to express their disgust with Kevin's behavior. A businessman eating alone said he had filmed part of the incident on his phone and would be happy to provide it as evidence if needed. This is going to be all over social media by tomorrow, Lisa observed, watching people discreetly taking photos and typing on their phones. David sighed. Probably. I just hope it leads to something positive instead of just more anger and division. Across the restaurant, they could see Kevin in Patricia's office, visible through a glass window. He was gesturing wildly, clearly arguing his case. At one point, he pointed toward David and Lisa's table, and even from a distance they could see the anger on his face. He still thinks he did nothing wrong, Lisa said, shaking her head. Some people never learn, David replied. They double down instead of reflecting on their actions. Patricia returned to their table, looking even more stressed than before. She sat down heavily and rubbed her temples. How did it go? David asked, though her expression already suggested the answer. He's been terminated, effective immediately, Patricia said, but I have to tell you he showed absolutely no remorse. He insisted he was just doing his job, protecting the restaurant from potential problems. He couldn't understand why everyone was making such a big deal out of it. What about the hostess situation? That's more complicated. Patricia looked uncomfortable. She admits that when she saw you, she made assumptions. She thought you might be more comfortable away from the main dining area. She says it wasn't malicious, just misguided. Lisa's jaw tightened. Misguided? She deliberately seated us in the worst section of the restaurant based on the color of our skin. That's not misguided, that's discrimination. You're absolutely right, Patricia agreed. I'm not defending her actions. I'm just telling you what she said. She's been written up and will be attending mandatory sensitivity training. If anything like this happens again, she'll be terminated too. David wasn't entirely satisfied with that response, but he could see that Patricia was trying to handle a difficult situation. The hostess probably hadn't meant to be malicious, but impact mattered more than intent. There's something else, Patricia continued. Kevin said something before he left that I think you should know about. What's that? He said this whole situation is unfair because he's about to lose his job while you get to play the race card and probably get free meals for life. The comment was so tone-deaf, so completely missing the point, that David almost laughed. Almost. He really doesn't get it, does he? Lisa said. Not even a little bit, Patricia replied. And frankly, that makes me even more certain that firing him was the right decision. Someone with that attitude has no business working in customer service. As they talked, David noticed a commotion near the kitchen. Kevin had emerged from the office and was walking through the restaurant, but instead of leaving quietly, he was stopping at tables and talking to other diners. From his gestures and the reactions of the people he was talking to, it was clear he was trying to defend himself and possibly gather support. Is he seriously doing what I think he's doing? Lisa asked, watching in amazement. Patricia turned around and saw Kevin working the room. Her face went red with anger. Excuse me, she said, standing up abruptly. They watched as Patricia marched over to Kevin and grabbed his arm, clearly telling him to leave immediately. But Kevin pulled away from her and raised his voice loud enough for the entire restaurant to hear. This is exactly what's wrong with this country, Kevin announced to the dining room. Honest. Hardworking people get fired while others get special treatment just because they claim discrimination. I was doing my job, protecting this restaurant from people who probably couldn't even afford to eat here. The restaurant went dead silent. Even the kitchen noise seemed to stop. David felt every pair of eyes in the room turned toward him and Lisa. Kevin wasn't done. You all saw them, he continued, pointing directly at their table. They walk in here acting like they own the place, ordering expensive wine, making demands. And when someone asks reasonable questions about payment, suddenly it's a hate crime. David had reached his limit. He stood up slowly, his full height commanding attention. When he spoke, his voice was calm but carried clearly through the silent restaurant. "You're right about one thing," he said to Kevin. "I couldn't afford to eat here when I was your age. I was working 2 jobs and going to school at night, trying to build something better for my family. I know what it's like to count every dollar and wonder if I belong in places like this." The room was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. "But here's what you don't understand," David continued. "Respect isn't something you earn with money or status. It's something every human being deserves simply for being human. And what you did tonight wasn't protecting this restaurant. It was revealing something ugly about yourself." Kevin's face was getting redder by the minute, but he wasn't backing down. "Easy to say when you're getting special treatment. How much free stuff are they giving you to keep quiet about this?" The accusation hung in the air like a poison cloud. David felt his temper flare, but before he could respond, something unexpected happened. The elderly woman who had spoken to them earlier stood up at her table. "Young man," she said in a voice that could have cut steel, "I have been coming to this restaurant longer than you've been alive. I have never seen such disgraceful behavior from an employee, and your continued presence here is ruining everyone's evening." Her husband stood up too. "We're leaving, and we won't be back until management ensures this kind of behavior is never tolerated again." Then something remarkable happened. One by one, other diners began standing up as well. The businessman who had offered to share his video, the young couple who had stopped by their table. Even some people who hadn't spoken to David and Lisa directly were gathering their things and heading for the exit. Kevin looked around in shock as nearly half the restaurant began filing out. "Wait," he called after them. "You're leaving because of them? They're the ones causing the problem." But no one was listening to him anymore. As the restaurant emptied around them, Kevin finally seemed to understand the gravity of what was happening. His confident demeanor cracked as he watched table after table of customers leave. Patricia looked like she was having the worst night of her professional career. "Kevin, you need to leave right now," Patricia said firmly. "Security will escort you out if necessary." For the first time since the whole ordeal began, Kevin looked uncertain. The reality of losing his job seemed to be sinking in, and the public rejection by the other customers had clearly shaken him. "Wait," he said, his voice losing its earlier arrogance. "Maybe we can work this out. I was just doing what I thought was right." David, who had remained standing throughout Kevin's outburst, looked at the young man with something approaching pity. "Kevin, do you want to know what the real tragedy is here?" Kevin nodded, suddenly looking much younger than his 22 years. "The tragedy is that you had an opportunity tonight to learn something important about yourself and other people. Instead, you doubled down on ignorance and made everything worse." Lisa stood up beside her father. "You know what I'm going to remember most about tonight? Not the discrimination, not the rudeness, not even the public humiliation. I'm going to remember how the other customers stood up for what was right. I'm going to remember that most people, when they see injustice, choose to act." Kevin looked around the nearly empty restaurant, then back at David and Lisa. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Maybe understanding, maybe regret. He started, then stopped. "I didn't mean for it to be like this. But it was like this," David said gently. "And now you have to decide what you're going to do with this experience. Are you going to learn from it? Or are you going to blame everyone else?" Patricia stepped between them. "Kevin, you really do need to leave now. We'll mail your final paycheck." As Kevin walked toward the exit, he turned back one more time. "Mr. Thompson?" he called out. "Yes?" Kevin struggled with the words. "I'm sorry. I don't know if that means anything now, but I am sorry." David nodded. "Apologies are a start, Kevin. But the real work happens after the apology. What you do next is what matters." After Kevin left, the restaurant felt different. Quieter, but also somehow lighter. Patricia returned to their table looking exhausted. "I don't even know what to say," she admitted. "In 25 years in this business, I've never experienced anything like tonight." "What happens now?" Lisa asked. Patricia took a deep breath. "Well, first, I'm going to personally ensure that every employee in our entire restaurant group receives enhanced sensitivity training. What happened tonight revealed some serious gaps in our company culture." "That's a good start," David said. "Second, I want to make you an offer, though I completely understand if you decline. We would like to invite you back as our guests. Not because of your business connection, but because you deserve the dining experience you came here for tonight." David looked at Lisa, who shrugged. "What do you think, sweetheart?" "I think people deserve second chances," Lisa said. But not just the restaurant. Kevin too, maybe. Not his job back, but a chance to learn and grow from this. Patricia looked surprised. After everything he put you through, you'd be willing to give him another chance? Not here, David clarified, but somewhere. With someone who can help him understand why his behavior was wrong and how to do better. Hate and ignorance aren't solved by punishment alone. They're solved by education and exposure to different perspectives. You're more generous than I would be, Patricia admitted. David smiled sadly. I've learned that carrying anger hurts me more than it hurts the people I'm angry at. That doesn't mean accepting bad behavior or not holding people accountable. It means choosing how much of my energy I want to spend on negative emotions. As they prepared to leave, several of the remaining customers approached their table one final time. The elderly couple who had been so supportive came over first. We wanted to give you our contact information, the woman said, handing David a business card. If you need witnesses for any legal proceedings, we saw everything. Thank you, David said, genuinely touched. But I don't think we'll be pursuing legal action. Sometimes the best justice is people doing better going forward. The businessman who had filmed part of the incident stopped by next. I still have the video if you change your mind. But I wanted to say something else. I've eaten here dozens of times and I never noticed how they treat different customers. Tonight opened my eyes. That's exactly what we need, Lisa said. People paying attention and speaking up when they see something wrong. As they finally headed toward the exit, Patricia walked with them. I know this probably sounds hollow after everything that happened, but I hope you'll consider coming back. Not for a business dinner or a special occasion, but just because you want to. David paused at the door. Patricia, can I ask you something? Of course. How many other customers have experienced what we did tonight but didn't have the social status or resources to make their voices heard? Patricia was quiet for a long moment. Probably more than I want to admit, she said finally. That's what really needs to change, David said. Not just how you treat CEOs or celebrities, but how you treat everyone. The single mom bringing her kids for a birthday dinner. The young couple on their first date. The elderly man eating alone. Everyone deserves dignity. You're absolutely right, and I promise you that's going to change. Outside in the cool evening air, David and Lisa walked toward their car in silence. The valet, who had witnessed some of the commotion through the restaurant's windows, brought their vehicle quickly and treated them with obvious respect. So, Lisa said as they drove away, that wasn't exactly the celebration dinner we planned. David laughed, the first genuine laugh of the evening. No, it wasn't. Are you disappointed? Disappointed? Dad, tonight was more educational than a semester of law school. I saw discrimination in action, but I also saw people stand up against it. I saw how prejudice works, but also how dignity and grace can triumph over ignorance. I'm proud of how you handled yourself tonight. I learned from watching you. You could have gotten angry, could have made a scene, could have used your influence to destroy that kid's future. Instead, you chose to be better than the situation. David pulled over at a red light and looked at his daughter. You know what the hardest part of tonight was? What? Knowing that you're going to face situations like this throughout your life, and I won't always be there to help you through them. Lisa reached over and squeezed her father's hand. You've already helped me through them, Dad. You've shown me how to respond with strength and dignity, how to demand respect without losing my own integrity, how to fight injustice without becoming bitter. As they drove through the city, David's phone started buzzing with notifications. Word of the incident was already spreading on social media, but surprisingly, most of the posts weren't angry rants or calls for boycotts. Instead, people were sharing the story as an example of how to handle discrimination with grace, and how important it is for bystanders to speak up. Look at this, Lisa said, reading from her own phone. Someone posted a video of you talking to Kevin at the end. The caption says, "This is what real leadership looks like. Turning a moment of hate into a teaching opportunity." I just hope something good comes from all this, David said. 3 months later, David received a letter in the mail. It was handwritten on simple notebook paper, and the return address showed it was from Kevin. The letter was 2 pages long, but the essence of it was simple. Kevin had spent the month since that night in serious reflection. He had enrolled in community college courses on diversity and social justice. He had volunteered at a local community center, working with people from backgrounds different from his own. He had learned about the history of discrimination and its ongoing effects. Most importantly, he had learned to see people as individuals rather than stereotypes. The letter ended with a request that surprised David. Kevin asked if he could meet with him, not to ask for forgiveness or to try to undo the past, but to thank him for responding with education rather than revenge. David showed the letter to Lisa, who was now thriving in her first year of law school. "Are you going to meet with him?" she asked. "I think so," David said. "People deserve a chance to grow, even people who hurt us, especially people who hurt us. Because if they can change, if they can learn to be better, then maybe we can start healing some of the divisions in this world." The meeting took place in David's office at TechFlow Industries. Kevin was nervous but sincere, and the conversation lasted for 2 hours. By the end, David had offered Kevin an entry-level position in his company's diversity and inclusion department. Not as a favor, but because Kevin's personal journey from prejudice to understanding gave him unique insights into how people could change. Kevin accepted the job, and over the following years, he became one of the company's most effective advocates for workplace equality. He often spoke to groups about his experience that night at Bella Vista, using his own story as a cautionary tale about the dangers of assumptions and stereotypes. The restaurant itself underwent significant changes. Patricia implemented comprehensive diversity training for all employees, redesigned their seating policies to ensure fairness, and created a customer feedback system specifically designed to catch discriminatory treatment. The business partnership with TechFlow Industries went forward, but with additional provisions requiring ongoing training and accountability measures. Most importantly, the story of that night became something larger than the individuals involved. It became a reminder that people can change, that dignity and grace are more powerful than anger and revenge, and that sometimes the best response to hatred is the patient work of education and understanding. And Lisa? She graduated at the top of her law school class and went on to specialize in civil rights law, inspired by a night that started with discrimination, but ended with hope for a better world.